The lounge was selling you a fantasy of frictionless travel. No visas, no labor, just aperitifs at the hour when the light goes gold. And the music underneath was humming about how that fantasy is exactly what breaks you. They weren't being hypocritical, they were being precise. The jet-set cosmopolitanism wasn't a mask over the politics. It was the politics made audible. This is what happens when you let yourself want beautiful things in a system designed to make beauty a credential.
So the lounge is the client spec, and the client spec is the sound. Same as always, we'll each land somewhere out of 100 by the end, and the editor's score is the final word, separate from ours. They named their label after the actual lounge they ran in DC. A city where global trade policy gets made, not just observed. So the room isn't a metaphor, it's the address. They're not making records that happen to fit a room, they're making the room in wax.
Okay, so that matters because, like, a studio is a room where you go to make something, and a lounge is a room where you go to feel something, and those are different contracts entirely. And I think what happened is they met over cocktails first, not a studio. And then they spent the whole album trying to bottle that feeling back up instead of letting each song figure out what it wanted to be. Every track is basically asking, how do we get back there? How do we remake what happened when we weren't trying?
The architecture there is genuinely post-national. This record pulls in vocalists from across the globe. And Rio, Kingston, Bombay all end up breathing the same air in a single room, which is either composition that happens to use borrowed materials, or curation so precise it becomes its own grammar. I genuinely don't know which, and the record seems to be dodging the question on purpose.
The bass isn't decoration on this one, it's doing the structural work. 9 different vocal traditions, right, but nothing sits in the same frequency space twice. That low end cements where everybody stands. Most people hear lounge and file it away. What's actually happening is a dub mix pretending to be a drawing room record. Dub being the tradition where you strip a track back to bass and space and let the echo do the emotional work. Drawing room being the polite, genteel background music you'd put on for company so nobody has to actually engage with it.
Y'all, that detail is haunting me. Like Emiliana Torini is inside Gollum's head. She voiced his song for the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, singing about hunger and corruption, and then she pivots to this record where she's floating over strings that sound like they're underwater. And both of those are her, same person, same year. And I need to know if one of them is bleeding into the other, or if she just has that range where she can live in two temperatures at once, and neither one gets diluted.
The reviews aren't incompatible. They're describing the same record from different floors. Blender, who called it pleasant background listening and meant that as a knock. Wanted foreground. The BBC heard background that was doing foreground's structural work. One of them mistook what the record was for and called it a failure. The other understood the job and called it inevitable. Those aren't equal disagreements about taste.
So it wasn't ignored and then rediscovered. It was doing the job it was built for the moment it landed. That's the complication you're skirting.
Y'all, that's exactly the point, though. The album doesn't care if it's in a hotel bar or in somebody's apartment at 2 in the morning feeling like they're about to lose everything. Because both of those people are listening to the same song about displacement, and they're both getting what they need from it. I don't think that's a failure of the record. I think that's what it's built to do.
My first instinct was furniture music. Eric Sadie's old term for sound designed to sit in a room without ever demanding to be heard, the sonic equivalent of a nice lamp. Which is a diagnosis I learned to make before I learned to ask whether the diagnosis mattered, whether something assembled from 9 separate voices across 3 continents could be less composed than something a single person sat down and wrote in a room. That's the prejudice talking. I know it's the prejudice because I can feel it working.
They pulled them in from 3 different rooms, different continents, and got them to sit in the same space on the mix. That's not assembly line work. That's a discipline. You've got phase problems, where 2 takes of the same sound can cancel each other out when they're layered. You've got delay to manage. You've got the room in each vocal fighting the room you're building. Most records that cobble it together, you hear the seams. This one doesn't.
Y'all but marching the hate machines into the sun. That's the one where you stop hearing the seams, and I don't think that's because of what happened in the mix. I think it's because somebody made a choice about what impulse goes next to what impulse. Like the dub pressure and that vocal found each other and decided they were the same thing. And once you hear that they're the same thing, you can't unhear it, and that's not a trick, that's a decision.
The spatial coherence he's naming 9 bodies in one room. None of them actually there. That's a technical accomplishment, fine. But what she's hearing is something else entirely. Not whether the mix holds together, but whether it feels like a choice rather than a fix. Those aren't the same thing, and I'm not sure we get to assume they are.
Shelf life and canonicity aren't the same thing. A record can sell steadily for 20 years and still be argued about in the same way it was argued about on release. That's not aging like wine, that's just sitting on the shelf. The disagreement hasn't moved. That's what I'm hearing when you say it's proven itself.
Y'all, that's exactly it though. All Myuzx got their checklist, their framework, and that record didn't fit the boxes, so they docked it, and fine, that's criticism doing its job. But I've listened to it maybe 40 some times this month alone, and so has everybody I know who actually found it instead of being told to care about it. And that's 20 plus years of people showing up. I don't know that the people showing up get to be wrong about whether something's still in them, just because the people with the bylines decided it aged weird.
You're right that those 9 vocalists across 3 continents and 3 languages is real. It's extraordinary. It's the spine of the record. But selection and arrangement sit in a different house than composition, and I won't launder one into the other just because the curation is flawless. She knew what she wanted, she found it, she placed it with impeccable taste. That's not the same as having made it, and I'm not prepared to call them equivalent acts of authorship, even when both produce something worth standing in.
The mix sits tight, the reverb's deliberate, you can hear where every vocal lands in the space. That's 81 to 87, and I'll score it exactly that. Doesn't move the needle on what the record is.
Okay, wait, but we're sitting here asking where the origination lives, and I think we're asking the question wrong. Because dub didn't originate in a studio either. It originated in a remix, and bossa nova is samba, the Brazilian rhythm that drives the whole thing. That someone decided to play quieter and sadder, and the rag. The rag is a South Asian classical framework, 10 centuries of people taking the same 20 notes and finding new things inside them. So, what does origination even mean when you're working inside a tradition that's literally built on people before you doing exactly that? Taking something that existed and making it say something new. And I don't know how to score that honestly if the score says you only get points for starting from nothing, because nothing starts from nothing. And if we're being real about it, we'd have to say Joni Mitchell didn't originate anything either because harmony existed. But we don't say that about Joni Mitchell, so I guess what I'm asking is, why does Thievery Corporation have to prove origination when the traditions they're in conversation with don't have to? And if that's not the real argument here, then what is it actually about?
The genealogy recedes, but the question doesn't. Yes, every tradition borrowed from something, granted, but borrowed and transformed are not the same labor. And I'm listening to see where the synthesis happens instead of the arrangement. They've placed the sitar next to the strings next to the dub delay, all of it beside a groove that could have come from anywhere. And it's gorgeous, truly, I'm not arguing beauty. But I haven't heard the moment where those things stop being beside each other and start being bound. Where the sitar makes the dub delay necessary, where you'd miss it if it weren't there. rather than just sitting pleasantly next to it? Where does one thing make the next thing necessary instead of just companionable? That's the question I came in with, and you've complicated the genealogy without answering it. Some classically trained listeners waved it off as pastiche. Stitched, not composed. I was one of them. And I think what I was doing was protecting myself from having to grant that spatial architecture. The decision-making about where a sound lives and when it arrives is compositional labor. It is. The engineer just proved it with evidence I cannot undo. I concede. Gracefully. Note the adverb.
The mix sits right. There's headroom, meaning the loud moments aren't crushed up against the ceiling, and the transients, the sharp attack on every drum hit and pluck, are clean. I'll credit that fully. But aged like fine wine needs consensus, and we've got the BBC lot saying it's essential listening and Blender calling it background, and neither of them's moved in 20 years. That's not aging. That's a split that held.
76 felt right when I was still mad at it, but listening back just now, I think it's lower than what I'm actually hearing. Call it 76 still, but I want that on the record as a floor, not a ceiling.
The 18th Street Lounge sold a jet-set cosmopolitanism that somehow also carried anti-globalization politics. And I think that's actually what the record is, not what it's failing to be. The dub work is exquisite, the politics are real, the marketing was aiming at two rooms at once, and neither one felt invited. So the question is whether that simultaneous address is a fracture or a feature. Whether you're supposed to feel the seam, or whether the seam is precisely where the intelligence lives. I've spent 20 years in rooms where that kind of double address was called strategy. I'm not entirely sure it's not.
I say the real thing. The split at release wasn't about the music, it was about whether comfort is allowed to carry politics, and nobody on this panel has said which side of that they're actually on.
21 points is the desk and the room talking past each other, not the room disagreeing with itself.
These as argument, not background, infrastructure. The layered dub architecture here is doing ideological work the Blender review couldn't hear because it was listening for hooks, and the record was delivering worldview. Cosmopolitanism rendered in texture, not slogan. Exile underneath the lounge surface. Resistance in the mix. Overrated by nobody. Underread by most. I've seen this reverse. Twice. The reputation earned since is the correct one. Ideate.
74 from me, not because I resolved the question, but because the ambiguity itself is worth that much. The camouflage is not a flaw. It's the record's actual argument, which is why it's dividing us cleanly. You either read the surface as evidence of depth underneath, or you read it as a surface that earned the right to stay shallow by being so perfectly, unapologetically shallow that it became a kind of honesty. The three of you are scoring the same record, but you're not disagreeing about what it is. You're disagreeing about whether a record gets to seduce you into staying, or whether seduction without revelation is a different kind of betrayal.
And I keep coming back to Tori Neon until the morning. That dry, close vocal sitting in all that reverb like she's whispering in a cathedral, you know. And the same year she's doing Gollum's song for Two Towers, which is all echo and despair. And here she's doing this thing that's intimate and still somehow vast. I don't know if that proves anything about the album's choices, but it's the thing that makes me keep pressing play, and I think that counts for something even if we're scoring it.
The vocals in a dead room and everything else is swimming. That's not accident. Someone heard that contrast and kept it.
The vocal placement is compositional fine. The threshold question, where does craft become curation, and does it matter which one it was? That's the permanent argument, not the recoverable fact. They composed something. Whether they composed enough depends on what you think composition owes you, and I'm genuinely content to leave that where it sits.
Y'all, but here's what I can't figure out. Does 20 years of history make liberation mean something different now than it meant in 2002 when somebody was ordering a mojito under it? Or does it just make the original choice meaner in hindsight, like we're supposed to feel better about the politics because we can finally see them clearly? And I don't know if that's redemption or if that's just how we convince ourselves compromise was actually vision all along.
The bar's gone. The record's still there.